How's it going, guys? Topic for today's video, how to buy your first bike. So this video is, there's going to be a lot of information covered. It might be a little bit longer than normal, but I guarantee you that it's all going to be good, solid information and not very much fluff or kind of like rambling or whatever. Lots of good information, so I highly suggest that you watch all the way to the end. So when you're looking at what bike to buy for your very first bike, you have to start thinking about what is this bike going to be used for. Are you going to be, racing with the bike? Are you going to be riding off-road? Are you going to be commuting? So you're just going, like to and from work, to and from school, etc., etc. What is the bike going to be used for primarily, right? So I know for the most part, people who are watching my channel, typically you're not going to be into racing. You're probably not going to be doing too much off-road stuff. So primarily, your bike is going to be used for commuting or to build your fitness. So with that in mind, when you're buying a bike that is going to be used for commuting, there's different things that you want to look at in terms of what is actually on the bike itself, what type of mount it has, what type of gearing it has, as opposed to a road bike that you're going to be used for racing, or a mountain bike that you're going to be used for trail riding. So there's three main frame styles of bikes out there that I would classify as the three main. So you have a road bike, you have a mountain bike, and then you have a hybrid bike. So the road bike is going to be the fastest style of bike. It's going to be the lightest. It usually has the thinnest tires. They also tend to be the more expensive style of bike, just because they are faster and lighter. They usually have better quality components on it. That being said, they can be, for someone who's new to cycling, they can be a little bit uncomfortable to ride because you're in a more kind of like an aggressive riding position. So for people who are really new, they might be a little bit uncomfortable at first as compared to either a hybrid or a mountain bike. So a mountain bike is typically used to be riding off trails. You shouldn't, if you're going to be using a bike that you're only going to be riding on the road typically, there's no point in getting a mountain bike. I know a lot of people love to buy these like cheap mountain bikes that have the shocks on the front and a shock through the shock for the rear wheel. These bikes are typically extremely heavy. They're very inefficient. They have the big tires on them, so you have a lot of rolling resistance, and they're just really not efficient bikes at all for riding on the road. And then a hybrid bike is kind of like a mix between a road bike and a mountain bike. And so I know a lot of people who are watching this, either an entry-level road bike, so one of the cheaper road bikes is going to be the type of bike that's going to be best for them, or it's going to be a hybrid bike. And we're going to talk exactly why that these bikes are probably going to be the best bet for you. So the first important point when you're kind of looking at a bike to buy is what type of gearing is on this bike. Now, I'm assuming that you're going to be using the bike for commuting, and chances are, if you're watching this video, you're very new to cycling and you probably don't have a lot of fitness on the bike. So getting a bike with proper gearing is definitely going to be really, really important. So if there's a lot of hills in your area and you're going to be riding up and down hills quite a bit, if you don't have the proper gearing on your bike, it can make it almost impossible. So I know, for example, if you have a lot of hills in your area, a single speed bike is not something that you want, as well as typically a lot of older kind of like road bikes and older cruiser bikes. The range of gears that these bikes tend to have is really shitty and really shitty for climbing hills as well. So when you're looking at a bike to buy, typically if you're buying either a lower end road bike or you're buying a hybrid bike, what you want to look for is a bike that has a triple ring crankset on the front. So typically what I mean by that is that there's going to be 3 chain rings on the front crankset. And so like a standard crankset for a triple ring is going to be probably a 48, 38, and a 28. So that means on the biggest ring, there's going to be 48 teeth, then 38 teeth, and 28 teeth. It's going to be somewhere in that area, right? And so basically having that range on your front crankset is going to give you a much bigger range for climbing up hills. So this is important because if you're climbing up a hill, you want to be able to spin the pedals quite fast. It's the most efficient way to get up. It's the easiest on your knees. We call it grinding up a hill, right? If you're grinding up a hill where your pedals, basically your cadence is like really slow like this, then it's very, very difficult on your body and on your knees especially. So it's really important that if you're going to be doing a lot of hill climbing and it could be even just short little climbs, short steep climbs, is to have a bike with proper gearing. So typically with an entry-level road bike, the very lower end ones, and most hybrid bikes are going to have a triple crankset. Something else that you want to look at on a bike is the type of mount that it has. So can the bike accept fenders and a rack? So for most people who are commuting, having a bike that has fenders and a rack on it is going to be really nice. The reason for that is fenders, when it rains out, makes riding in the rain much nicer. So if you're riding to and from work, to and from school, and you're riding through the rain, and you don't have, say, like a rear fender on your bike, basically your whole backside is just going to be soaking wet. So getting a bike that has the proper mount so that you can put a fender on the front and on the back, I think is highly important. And also having the ability to put a rack on the back as well. So a rack on the back of the bike is really beneficial if you're going to be doing a lot of commuting and you're going to be carrying some heavy items with you. So if you're bringing your books to school, or you're going to work and you have, your laptop, or you have some heavy items that you're going to be carrying constantly while on the bike, then having the ability to use saddlebags. So here, I'm going to grab my saddlebag. So having the ability to put saddlebags, so basically that you can clip onto a rack. So this is basically the mount. These basically clip onto the rack. So having that ability to be able to carry heavy items and not have to wear a backpack is something that is definitely super important. Third main factor I'd say that you want to look at is the bike going to fit me. So I'm going to be basically going through the difference between buying a new bike or buying a used bike. I highly suggest buying a new bike just for the fact that you can go to an actual bike shop. They'll be able to look at you and basically determine what size is going to be best for you, because the fit of the bike definitely does make a significant difference in terms of reducing your risk of injury as well as just your overall comfort on the bike. So they can make certain adjustments to the bike, to the seat height, to the frame size, in order to basically give you the most efficient position, as well as something that is going to be more enjoyable to ride just because it's going to be more comfortable. So when people are first getting into cycling, they probably don't typically want to spend a lot of money. So they probably are thinking to themselves that they're just going to buy a cheap used bike on Craigslist or Kijiji. And I kind of see that if you want to make cycling a big part of your life, I definitely would recommend to not do that. For a main few reasons. Buying a used bike, typically, if you're new to cycling, you don't necessarily know what to look for. And that's what I'm trying to go over in this video, things to look for in a bike. But at the same time, if you're still new to it, you might overlook some important features that you might buy the bike and then realize afterwards, it's like, oh, I can't do this or I can't have that on it. Or possibly the bike fits you absolutely horribly. And also you have no idea what the history of the bike is when you're buying used. So somebody could have used it basically for a month and they rode it maybe 3 or 4 times and then they're selling it. But then you could have somebody who might have crashed the bike multiple times. Maybe it has hairline fractures through the frame. I kind of get a little uneasy when I'm buying, if I were to buy a used bike, just because I don't necessarily know what I'm buying. I don't know what's happened to the bike before. So some of the pros with buying a used bike would be that it's typically cheaper. And I say typically cheaper. You can buy new bikes for pretty cheap. So some of the cons would be that you don't know the bike history. You don't know if the bike is going to fit you. There's no free bike tuning. So when you buy a new bike, typically what happens is that they give you a year of free tune-ups. So yeah, I just kind of get a little bit uneasy when people go about buying a used bike, just because you don't necessarily know what you're going to be getting. So when buying a new bike though, what are the pros of buying a new bike? So basically, typically what's going to happen is you're going to go into a bike shop. They're going to look at you. They're going to ask you, what is the bike going to be used for? And so basically what they're going to try to decide is what bike is going to be best for you and your needs. So you're going to be able to work with someone directly, and they're going to be able to assist you in finding the best bike. Typically what happens after you buy your bike is that they're going to fit you up on your bike. It usually takes 10 or 15 minutes after you buy it, and then they'll fit you up so that the bike is obviously it's gonna be comfortable for you. And they're typically gonna sell you a bike that is going to be the best size for you as well. Another big pro is that you know that the bike is brand new, so that you're not going to run into probably any surprises with the bike down the road, just because you know that basically you're the only one that has ridden this bike. Something else that is nice when you're buying from a local bike shop, most of them will typically offer at least 6 months to a year of free tune-ups. So if you're not very fluent with like adjusting the gears or adjusting the braking or truing up your wheel, it's kind of nice when you're buying from a local bike shop, because they'll just be like, all right, you can bring the bike back as many times as you want within a year, and we'll tune the bike up and just kind of like make any little tweaks to the bike just to keep you going. When you buy a new bike, basically over time, as you start to use it, the bike kind of gets adjusted to being ridden. So some of the cables will stretch, the wheel might come out of true a little bit, and if you don't know how to fix these things yourself, then and you have to pay somebody else to do it, then it can be a little bit costly over time. So I highly recommend buying a new bike over a used bike, especially if you're new to cycling. Like, I could go out and probably buy a used bike, but I don't think I'd feel 100% comfortable doing it. I'd just rather buy a new bike personally. Yes, you might get a really good deal buying a used bike. If you are going to buy a used bike, try to buy it off of a friend or a family member, someone that you know, as opposed to maybe just buying it completely blind off the internet. Another thing to mention is that you can buy new bikes online, just from like an online bike store. The problem with that is that you don't necessarily know what bike is going to fit you, what's the best size going to be. What's nice is when you buy from a local bike shop, you can see the bike, they can see you, fit you up to basically the right bike, and you get to look at the bike, and you get to touch it, and you get to feel the gears. Buying a bike online, unless you know exactly what you're looking for, unless you know exactly what your size is, I would highly suggest not doing that. Now, a question that I get a lot of is, how much should I be spending on a bike? So this is obviously going to be dependent on a lot of factors in your life, like how much of a budget do you have. A lot of the reason why people go for used bikes is because they can buy it for maybe $100, $200 or something like that. If I were to go back in time, before I built my own bamboo frame and stuff and spent a shit ton of money into that, is I would just buy a standard entry-level road bike, or an entry-level, or just a hybrid bike. So for most people, that is going to be basically the best option for them. And yes, an entry-level road bike can run you anywhere from typically $600 all the way up to $1,300 or $1,400. Finding something for maybe $800 to $1,000 is probably going to be the best bet for people. Once you get over the $1,000 and you start spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a bike, the main difference between the $1,000 bike and the $5,000 bike is not necessarily the quality of the components, it's more so the actual weight of the bike. So going from a $1,000 bike that might weigh 20 pounds up to a $5,000 bike, the main difference between the two is you might lose 4 to 5 pounds on the bike, probably typically about 4 pounds. So you might be going from a 20-pound bike to a 16-pound bike, and that's the major difference. Also, when you're buying like an entry-level road bike, most of them either have a compact crankset, so they have a 50-34 crankset on the front, which is going to be better for most people in terms of being able to spin at a higher cadence going up hills, as opposed to a standard crankset, which is a 53-39, as well as having easier gears. A lot of the entry-level road bikes also have the mounts for a rack and fenders as well, which is really good if you're going to be using the bike for commuting. So how much should you spend? I would spend as much as you can, without going over $1,000, $1,500 too much. So if you only have like $300 right now, and you can start saving some cash in order to buy a better bike, I would start saving cash and just make that initial purchase of your bike a better bike. So if you're going from a $200 bike to a $1,000 bike, basically the bike is going to be considerably lighter, but also the components on the bike are going to be of much higher quality. So basically the components are going to be able to last a lot longer, and you're going to get a lot more kind of wear out of the bike as opposed to buying like a $200 bike. You might find that you have to repair components or replace components a lot more often on that type of bike. That being said though, cheaper bikes typically have cheaper components, so it's actually cheaper to repair the bike. But I would still personally go with something that is typically in the $800 to $1,000 range, just because the bike is going to be much more efficient, it's going to be lighter, the components are going to be of a higher quality. Typically, you're going to be buying that bike new, so you're going to get a free bike fit, and then you're also going to get typically free bike tuning for at least 6 months to a year on that bike. So you can buy a hybrid bike for that amount, so a really good hybrid bike. That's going to be good for a lot of people, especially if you're new into cycling and you're just basically going to be using the bike for commuting. Maybe you're going to be doing a little bit of fitness training on it. That's going to be a good style of bike for you. I rode a hybrid bike for I did the first 15 or 20,000 kilometers on a hybrid bike through Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Australia, and back through Southeast Asia a second time. I did it all on a hybrid bike, and I think I spent $300 on that bike when I was in Vietnam, and it did get me through a lot of places for sure. So cheaper, kind of like a cheaper hybrid bike, it actually isn't that bad of an option. I would definitely go for an alloy or aluminum bike. So typically your entry-level road bikes are going to be aluminum. A nicer hybrid bike is typically going to be aluminum as well. Steel bikes, they can rust. So if the paint scratches and stuff, the bike can rust. Aluminum is not going to rust. So what bike brand should you use? I would use one of the 4 major brands. So that's Giant, Trek, Cannondale, and Specialized. So the difference between the quality of those 4 is going to be minimal. So it's not like one of these brands is just far superior to the other ones. They're very competitive, and so with being competitive with each other, the relative quality of the frame as well as the components that they use on the bike is going to be very similar. So I would just go for the bike out of those 4 major brands that basically just fits into your budget. So with going with those 4 major brands, one of the big benefits is that they all offer pretty well, I think on every single one of their bike frames, is that they offer a lifetime warranty on it. So that's going to be really nice, because if say 3 or 4 years down the line, maybe for some reason your frame has some sort of catastrophic failure or something like that, doesn't happen very often, but say it does happen, then you could possibly just get a new entire bike because of that. And some of the lesser known bike brands, the ones that aren't nearly as popular, they might offer maybe a 5-year warranty on their frame. So after that 5-year period, then maybe you have some type of failure on your frame, and then you have to buy a new bike. So if you've bought your first bike or you're in the process of buying your bike, what I'd highly recommend is buying a pair of mountain bike cycling shoes, and then the pedals that go along with it. So you might think to yourself that it's actually dangerous to clip your shoes into the pedals because it's going to be harder to get your feet out. Now, as someone who's ridden through all types of countries, all types of terrains and stuff, I actually find it more dangerous if I were riding with my running shoes on standard pedals. And there's a few reasons for that. One of the main reasons is when you're riding uphill, and say you want to get out of the saddle and you're riding, basically standing up on the pedals, and you're just wearing running shoes, it's very easy for your feet to slip off of those pedals. And if you've ever had that happen to yourself, what can happen is, especially for the guys, is that you can drop on the top bar. And drop on the top bar with your nether region is definitely not very nice. It can also, you can cut up your shins quite a bit as well if your feet drop off the pedals. I just think it's a lot safer using cycling shoes. It's also a lot more efficient as well. Again, if it doesn't fit into your budget right away, you don't have to do it right away. But you can get a pair of bike shoes for about $100, and you can get bike pedals, like clip-in pedals, for about $50. So it's about a $150 investment. I think that it makes a big difference. I think it makes cycling much more efficient and actually more, I would actually say it's more safe as well using bike shoes and bike pedals, just mainly because your feet are clipped into those pedals. You have a lot more control over the bike that way, and your feet aren't just gonna just fall off the pedals, because that can put you in a situation that is dangerous as well. Something else to consider, bikes that I probably wouldn't buy are bikes that are definitely Fixie bikes. So Fixie bikes, you'll see a lot of like hipsters riding them in like New York City. They look really cool because they're like simple and minimal. So a fixie bike is like where you're pedaling, and even if you want to coast, your pedals are still going to be turning over. And that's because there's a direct connection between the front crank and the rear wheel. So there's no freewheel on the back, so you just can't freewheel on the bike at all. And I think those are very dangerous because they don't have any brakes on them. And it's also not good for your knees because you're basically trying to slow down the bike by pedaling in reverse almost. It's not good for your legs, can be very dangerous to ride. If you do want to go with that style of bike, definitely get one with a freewheel on it, freewheel on the back, so that when you stop pedaling, the bike is still going to be able to freewheel, and you also actually have some real brakes on it as well. So I think that's important. Other bikes that I wouldn't buy would be, I saw this a lot when I was in Chicago, is like people riding these like 70s or 80s style road bikes. Those old road bikes are typically, they have really crappy gearing on it for one, and then also the actual fit of the bike has changed so much in terms of like comfort just over the last couple decades. So they're just very kind of like reached over on the bike. It doesn't look super comfortable. But a lot of the hipsters and stuff really enjoy those bikes because it's like, it's like the classic kind of like old style bike. If you're new to cycling, I wouldn't really recommend it at all. So bringing this all together, how to buy your first bike, I would highly recommend going to a bike shop, investing in a good quality bike, so spending anywhere between $500 to $1,000, getting an entry-level road bike or a nice hybrid bike. Look at the gearing, look at the mounts on the bike, and go to a local bike shop so that you can actually get fitted on the bike and you can get the right size, as opposed to buying a used bike because you just might not know what type of bike or what size of bike that you need. And I would definitely go that route. It makes a lot more sense. Invest in clip-in pedals and bike shoes. That's going to make such a big difference in terms of the safety as well as the efficiency of the bike itself. And yeah, that's the route that I would go. If I were to go back in time, my first bike that I did a lot of serious cycling on is I went to New York City. I made a bamboo frame bike and tried to put the components on that. It turned into a complete disaster just because I wanted to be different and unique and stuff. I would just go with the standard bike that you get at your local bike shop. Stay away from bikes with like shocks and stuff on it. If you're just going to be riding on the road, they're totally unnecessary. They usually have thicker tires. The bike is less efficient. It's heavier. And I would just stick with your standard road bike or your standard hybrid bike. For most people, that's going to be best. If you're very much overweight and you want to get into cycling and you're really, really, really terrible fitness and you haven't done anything your entire life, then probably getting a 29er mountain bike is going to be best. It's going to be very comfortable. The gearing on it is going to be a lot easier. So it has even easier gearing on it than a hybrid or an entry-level road bike. And yeah, that's about all I can say about how to buy your first bike. If you have any more questions or comments, definitely leave them in the box below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Peace out.